Okay, so it's 2022 and I have finally decided to get into game development. But you watching this video probably don't know who I am. I haven't been around YouTube until now. So I just want to recap a little bit. I want to briefly tell you about my previous game projects, how all these projects started, how far I got, what kind of lessons I learned along the way, and how all these previous endeavors finally prepared me to start again once more and give it another shot to become a game developer. So for the past 5 years, I've been working mainly as a web developer because that's my main profession. And my main programming job really has nothing to do with games or visual graphics. I've been developing web apps and web interfaces for a living, but in essence, I've always been somewhat curious about game development. I got a master's degree in computer science 5 years ago, specifically in the field of computer vision, which is actually the basis for all VR and AR technologies that exist today. And 5 years ago, this seemed like a pretty exciting new field to study. And I remember choosing this master's program specifically because it promised to teach me something about 3D modeling and even do a little bit of a game design. In reality, it was focused more on math. A lot of math, like the mathematical foundations for image compression and 3D geometry, camera calibration, object recognition, and similar computer vision problems. Which was really cool anyway, because it taught me how OpenGL works, how OpenCV works, how different graphics libraries work, all that good stuff. And the best part about it, every time I got a homework assignment, I got a chance to develop some kind of a video game demo or something related to game development. I want to tell you about one of the most ridiculous projects I made. It was a simple 3D game with some basic physics functionalities based in OpenGL, which in hindsight was a nice little project for a novice developer like me, and I'm quite proud of this first retro PlayStation 1 looking game project. But here's the most ridiculous part. I programmed it with, wait for it, Pascal. Yes, that's right.
Pascal.
The famous programming language created in the 1970s, which was probably most widely used in the 80s and 90s. Maybe you remember Delphi, the IDE for GUI app development? No? Or maybe you remember the early Apple computers like the Apple II or Lisa. Apparently it was widely used there as well. Anyway, the point is, it was very popular back in the day. It had its moment in the spotlight, but since then it has become a completely dead programming language. I remember talking about it with a friend of mine who was also a programmer, and I said like, oh, I'm working on this cool project which is kind of like a little 3D game. And he said, oh, cool, and what kind of language did you use to program it? Pascal. Oh, why? And why indeed? That is the question. I have no idea why I started this project in Pascal. Honestly, I think it was because of the fact that in the classroom, all the lessons were conducted in Delphi and Pascal, so I thought, you know, I'm already programming using this language, so why not use it for my homework assignments? I could have chosen C++ or Java instead, and boy oh boy was it fun to code in Pascal. It was already challenging to get a decent OpenGL setup running on it, but on top of that I had to find a decent Pascal-based physics library that would have some kind of a support header for it. Luckily, I found a library called Newton Dynamics. I won't get into details about how I got it to work, but all I can say it was tricky. Long story short, if you ever decide to make a state-of-the-art 3D game with stellar graphics, award-winning gameplay, mind-blowing physics, and for whatever, God knows, weird, unexplainable reason, you're coding it in Pascal, and on top of that you need a physics engine to go along with it, then I guess use Newton Dynamics. But please, just don't do it. Just don't. It's not worth your time, especially in 2022. But all in all, with the knowledge I had back then as an unseasoned university student, I think the game demo turned out to look quite decent. It had a basic shader, a skybox, a terrain, physical objects, and even multi-camera support. Also, the 3D objects were custom designed by me, like the box. I did that. It's totally mine, copyright protected. Okay. And also the main character, and I don't know for what reason I decided to make the main character completely topless. Probably I was aiming for some kind of a Bruce Lee type of character. I don't actually remember. Anyway, enough of this Pascal nonsense. Let's fast forward 2 years later when I was finishing my master's program and I had to choose what to do for my master's thesis. So I actually came up with a pretty cool project idea, which honestly to this day I'm pretty proud of. So the project I created was an Android-based multiplayer augmented reality game demo. It sounds pretty trivial if you consider that augmented reality is quite common these days, and there are a lot of libraries out there that do the heavy lifting for you, but back in 2016, when I was working on my master thesis, AR was just picking up steam. So there were not a lot of open source AR libraries out there. This was also the year when the world was blown away by Pokemon Go, and that really put AR on the map. But before that, there were not a lot of projects out there that were really, mind-blowing. Anyway, on top of everything, since this was my thesis project, I was advised not to use too many pre-built libraries for this project, as it would probably lower my grade. So I decided to do a lot of things from scratch. First, I implemented my own marker detection function using OpenCV and C++. I then created additional functions to translate this marker position to screen coordinates, to be able to map 3D objects on top of it. I even created an optical flow stabilization function to improve the 3D tracking performance for shaky camera conditions. All of this was done in OpenCV and pure C++. And for the record, I have to admit I am terrible at C++, but somehow I managed to pull it off anyway. And since this was done in C++, I had to use the Android NDK framework to bridge my C++ code with Java. And then I created a transparent 3D layer using OpenGL ES2, where I could overlay my 3D objects on top of the camera view by translating the OpenCV coordinates to native screen coordinates. And the next step, which was arguably the most important step because that was the main goal of this thesis, was to enable multiplayer functionality in this AR application, where two users using the same app, looking at the same marker, could see the same AR game view and interact with it simultaneously. For this, I created a simple Bluetooth connection thread between two users that would constantly communicate and send real-time updates about the game state. The last step was to actually create a gameplay for this game. And at this moment I was running out of time to finish my thesis, so I settled on a very boring gameplay of just two players walking around a 3D space collecting coins. Honestly, I can't even consider it a gameplay. It's more like a proof of concept, which was fine because initially the whole goal was to show how AR and mobile game mechanics with multiplayer functionality can work together in one project. If I had more time, I would probably continue working on this project to develop a more interesting game concept, but overall I ended up receiving a pretty good grade for this project and I was quite happy with it. This was also a 4-month-long project and I felt quite exhausted by the end of it. So after my graduation I decided to take a pause from it, but eventually I never got back to work on it because soon after my graduation I had to focus on finding an actual programming job. To my disappointment, at that time, at the place where I was living, there were not a lot of computer vision related jobs because there were actually not a lot of companies or startups that were actually using computer vision. So I ended up getting a web developer job instead, and I have been working in this field ever since. Unfortunately, after this career shift, I never really seriously got back into game development. I did, however, try multiple times throughout the years, but every time I ended up failing. And here's why. I always had this notion that if you want to develop games seriously, then you should do it all from scratch. You should be able to set up your own OpenGL environment, you should be able to program your own framework, you should be able to create all the shaders and all the graphical functions yourself. And I felt like if I wouldn't be doing all of these things from scratch, I would feel like an imposter and not like a serious game developer. And so with that notion, I tried a couple of times to start developing games on my free time, but I always abandoned these projects early on just because it was so exhausting to code everything from scratch every time over and over again. Sometimes it would just take a while and trial and error just to set up all the OpenGL binaries in the proper way. And so all of these times I failed. But this time is going to be different, because for the first time in all of my game dev journey, I have decided to take the easy route and actually use a game framework. And so this year I started learning Unity. And after just 2 weeks of learning, I'm already able to set up some decent little game projects that I can work on. And I have to tell you, this time I feel super pumped because I realized that creating games with a game framework like Unity is so much more fun, because you have this visual feedback, you have the test environment where you can run your games instantaneously, and you can still exercise your coding skills writing some complex game scripts. What I have realized now that this is the way to go. This is the new way I'm going to be building games from now on. And for the first time in my programmer career, I actually feel that I enjoy creating games, because I don't feel the struggle to solve complex graphical OpenGL problems. I can focus solely on the game design, the artwork, and the storytelling aspects. Since I'm probably gonna be just a simple indie game developer, I'm probably not gonna be working for any of those big game studios. I don't feel that pressure anymore that I have to build everything from scratch. And in the end, who cares how you build your game? It's how the game looks, how it feels, and how fun it is. That's what matters, right? Sure, I might not be a professional C++ game developer who can set up an OpenGL pipeline, with his eyes closed or whatever. But for me, that's not the point. For me, I want to build games because I love storytelling, I love being artistic, and that's why I think this time it's going to be a completely different journey for me. So with all that said, I'm planning to document my development work, and I'll be posting some devlogs on this channel. So if you're someone who wants to follow me on this journey, maybe get some inspiration, maybe learn a thing or two, then consider subscribing to my channel. I am planning on posting my first devlog in a couple of days. I'm gonna show you how I made this cute little dinosaur game. So stay tuned for that, and I wish you a lovely day. Bye.